Welcome. I'm Alan Peto, and I'm joined today by Sanathavihari Bhikkhu. He is a Westerner who became a monastic. So I figured he'd be great for the topic today. And the topic today is going to be, do you have to become a monk or nun to be an actual Buddhist? And is that the best way forward? So basically, we're going to be talking about monastics and laypersons inside this video today. So welcome, Bante.
Hello, Alan.
Right. So I think we kind of like start off with probably a little bit about your history and how you got into Buddhism and also became a monastic. I know it's a great story, but you were former, military. You're in the Air Force as well. So I mean, you have a nice, rich history here. But you eventually found Buddhism and then eventually decided to become a monastic. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could just kind of explain kind of like how you got into it. And then how you kind of decided, you know what, I want to take this extra step from being not just a layperson, but now I want to be ordained. I want to become a monastic. And kind of what was going through your mind at that time.
Yeah. I was in the Air Force and for a couple of years, Air Force Reserve, and did a couple of deployments too and all of that. And, my journey with Buddhism begins back in high school when I picked up a book from the Dalai Lama, and, it really resonated with me. And I was like, yeah, I'm a Buddhist, but I was in mature high school,
Right.
how high school is. So I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll come back to it later. And I did, every couple of years I'd come back to it. I'd read more Buddhist books. I went to a couple of temples, but unfortunately, due to language barriers, I wasn't really able to progress in those temples. And then it wasn't until like in my late 20s that I, really got back into it. I read a lot more. I studied a lot more. I went to many different Buddhist temples, both Theravada and Mahayana, and listening to a lot of mostly like online talks. And then after doing that for about almost 3 years, I decided to like take refuge formally, which is interesting because my teachers here at the Sri Lankan Theravada temple were like, oh, if you think you're a Buddhist, then you're a Buddhist. Like, that's it. And I was like, no, I want something I want something formal. Well, they're like, there isn't anything like ceremony. You just have to take refuge and say you want to practice 5 precepts. You can do that at home. But if you like, we can give them to you here, like that. And I was like, okay, I need the thing to make it real, to keep me honest. And so then I did that. And then after a year of practicing that, I also went again, I got deployed again. I came back. I went on a couple of meditation retreats. And then there was a couple things that happened. One is that I listened to a talk from one of my teachers named Bhante Punaji. And he basically said the only thing that there is to do in this life is practice Dhamma, So then like that really got me like, well, I was thinking, well, how can I practice Dhamma like full time, all the time, or most convenient way, or stuff like that. And then I had a experience during a meditation retreat, which made it very obvious to me, what I wanted to do. So with that understanding, intellectual understanding, and then combining it with this kind of like meditative experience, they both came together. And I looked at my life and I was like, I don't have any kids, like I'm free right now. Like my family's doing well. Like I don't have any other responsibilities. Like this is the time I can do it. I'm in a position where if I wanted to do it, I can do it. And then I asked the monks, can I ordain? And they laughed. They're like, oh, nice story. And they did that like 2 or 3 times until they noticed that I was being serious. And then they told me, okay, we're going to watch you for a couple months and then we'll see. And so then after a couple months, I think it was almost 8 months, then they told me you can come and stay at the temple as a layperson and we'll watch you. So then I stood at the temple for a couple of months as a layperson, practicing 8 precepts. And then I got my lower ordination, which is the Samanera ordination in Theravada. They call like the Papaja. So it's basically like 10 precepts, but you kind of practice the 227 without officially taking them, like a trial period. And then from there, it took me another 3 years to get the full ordination, just because I was waiting for my inactive reserve component military thing to get out. So even after you finish, technically, you still have another 2 years. Right. So I had to finish that because one of the rules that you have, or one of the questions you get asked when you become a higher ordained monk is, are you under the service of the king? which nowadays would mean like the president or the orders of the commander, right, of the country. So I couldn't say I couldn't say no to that question, so I couldn't get the higher ordination.
I think that's great. And you actually hit on a few topics on there as well, too, which I really enjoyed. So you went to a few different temples and there was that language barrier, right? And so I think that's in our Western world, we have a lot of, Buddhist temples. I mean, you could literally, and, Los Angeles is a great example. You can probably find every single tradition of Buddhism there, but it may not be always ones that you can actually, I would not say engage in, but like really delve into, because maybe there could be a language barrier. Like you're saying, not all the monastics might actually speak English because they're traditionally attending to the cultural needs and from the country of what that temple is actually supporting. So I think that's a challenge for a lot of Westerners. But then you also hit on one where the monastics were kind of laughing at you, like, "Oh, and what are you serious about this?" And I think that's something that needs to be talked about as well, because you probably have, and this is really one reason I wanted to do this video and talk with you and just bring up this topic. You have a lot of Westerners, the first thing they think about, probably don't know anything about Buddhism yet, but I want to become a monastic right away. And there's this romanticized vision of like what being a monastic is and how you become a monastic and everything else, where, they're kind of shocked by reality sometimes. So going to a temple, they may be disillusioned. Well, maybe I can't, understand what's going on here. Maybe don't even believe, like, why would you want to become a monastic? You're living in this wonderful Western civilization where you got everything. Why would you want to give that all up, right? And you're like, hey, this is really what I want to do. And they saw that faith and determination in you. We're like, okay, if you want to do this, let's go on to the next steps. And I think that was also important, where you're not just ordained, the next day. It's like, well, we're gonna watch you. We should probably do little retreats here with us, and then even after you're ordained, we're gonna watch you some more. So we really want to see that you can really essentially have this monastic lifestyle, a homeless lifestyle, and be able to follow all the precepts, which I think is also something that Westerners don't really see. Like we have maybe as Westerners 5 precepts, maybe up to 8 or 10, depending if we take a retreat. But you have, how many precepts do you have to follow?
227.
There you go. And I know in Theravada it's not almost a lot of nuns there, but like how many? Do you have a bunch more precepts, right? Yeah. So I think these aren't kind of like rules to punish you, but it's also you can, as monastic, whether that's a monk or a nun, progress on that path towards enlightenment, nirvana, right? I mean, that's all there to help us. But as laypersons, we're going to be very challenged to actually follow all those like hundreds of precepts, right? So when you first became ordained and you went through this entire period, what was most shocking to you? And like, what is almost like the daily life of a monk? What's your daily life,
Well, here, like within like the Mahayana and the Theravada tradition, you can see some differences, especially when it comes to like more like East Asian Mahayana. Everything's very communal. Like everyone meditates together, like in Zen places, Chan. Everyone does everything together, works together, everything together. Theravada tradition is true, but within the Theravada tradition, there's a lot more alone time, where you're left alone for hours on your own to like. You came here to meditate, you go do that, right? You came here to study, you go do that. Like the place needs to be clean. If you see something dirty or messy, you need to clean it on your own. So there's like a lot of self-initiative, in my training, where I felt like really like, like what's going on here? Like where are the monks at? Right. And then I asked other people, other monastics who trained in the Theravada tradition within the Sri Lankan tradition too. And they're like, yeah, like I had a friend who went to Sri Lanka and he was left in his little hut and his little kuti for hours throughout the day without seeing any other monks. So there is this kind of more of a traditional, like shamanic, ascetic kind of feel to it that you would see in traditional like Indian practices, where you're just kind of like the lonely meditator on your own. We do chanting in the morning together. We do meditation in the morning, but the majority of the day you'll be on your own. So that was kind of a shock. I was expecting, like us being together more. I was thinking like, oh, now I'm going to be friends with the monks. Like the chief monk's going to be my buddy. He's not going to be your buddy. He's your teacher, Right. And all the other monks there are senior to you. So they're going to be like these authority or mentor figures, So they'll be friendly with you, but there's like some there's some barriers that are out of respect that are not going to be crossed. So don't come in thinking that like, oh, me and my monk friends are going to be just hanging out all day and chit chatting. Like that's not going to happen.
Right.
I don't care if you're in the Mahayana or Theravada, it's not going to happen.
Right. And so I think that's a good point too. So there's an element there of, what's the right word here? Self-motivation, for what you're doing, self-discipline. And the discipline is also a major part of being a monastic, right? I mean, you're disciplining not just your mind, but kind of everything else. Like you're trying to be very holistic in what you're doing, because we're trying to get towards, nirvana, right? And I like how you gave the example of, the two major branches of Buddhism. So like, I'll say Mahayana. And so like, I'm not a monastic for my temple, but it's a Chan, and Pure Land is Chinese Buddhism, temple. And you can see it's very structured there as well, communal living, but very structured as well. And monastics are doing everything from arranging classes to retreats to website, online. I mean, it's like a variety of different things. So they are busy, busy, busy all the time. And so do you ever have to do that, like interact with laypersons, arrange anything, or kind of like, do you have to do kind of like any outreach or anything like that, or assisting people? Or can you just like, hey, I'm just going to stay in my room the entire time? Or do you have responsibilities essentially where I'm going?
So every monk's responsible for like the upkeep of the temple. So even the chief monk, you'll see them like sweeping and doing, like regular things. I took it upon myself to pick the things that I wanted to do. So for example, because I like Zen, and in the Zen tradition, the chief monk is the one who cleans the toilets. So when I got here, I said, I want to clean the toilets, So I took it upon myself now. So now since I've been here, no one else cleans the toilets. That's just my thing. They never asked me to do it. I just took it upon myself. And so everyone has like different duties. Some people sweep outside, some people clean inside. So we have like shared responsibility. And also if you see anything out of order, you have to take the initiative, and clean it up. You shouldn't be like, well, that's not my job, or I didn't do it. Like you have to, whatever needs to be done, you need to do it.
But there's basically no janitorial service coming in. It's no. You guys. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. You have to do your own laundry, right? You have to do all these things. And sometimes unexpected things happen at the temple, and like you have to kind of be like a handyman. You have to do a lot of handyman work, especially within the Thai tradition. Like Thai monks work hard. They actually like build temples, like they're doing a lot of the hard lifting, so like heavy lifting. So if you're thinking about going into the Thai tradition, you're basically gonna be like a laborer, like part of the year, doing stuff like that. But yeah, so I do I facilitate meditations. Most of the stuff's online because I do a lot of outreach to like the Latino community and stuff like that. But I would say that you could, if you wanted to, you could spend about like 80% of the day alone if you really wanted to.
So I liked how you also mentioned Thai. So like, in that culture, it's very culturally appropriate to become ordained, at least temporarily, right? And I've often seen a lot of Westerners, comment on it, like, well, can I just go to Thailand and become a monk? Almost like it's a rite of passage for something that's not a rite of passage in our culture, right? And so it's like, well, if I was never a monk, then am I really a Buddhist, right? And so I'm kind of diving into two, topics right here. So do you think, and this is just your personal opinion, because you're also ordained in the Sri Lankan tradition was Theravada, but like, so then we got, the Thai tradition of Theravada, right? And there's different ones there. But basically, you're going for maybe a month, 3 months, maybe a couple of years, maybe, or maybe your lifetime, but there's not a requirement to essentially stay there long-term, in at least in a Thai tradition. And so should a Westerner, and that's primarily what I'm talking about, should he like, well, I need to buy a ticket to, Thailand, become ordained? And, I think, where I'm going with this topic is it okay to be a layperson? And obviously my opinion is yes, absolutely. If you can become a monastic, I think that's fantastic. I definitely admire what you've done, because that's not something you see a lot of Westerners, actually do, but being a layperson, there's a lot to that, I don't think a lot of people actually see that, at least, with my temple and stuff like that. There's a lot that's actually going on that you can actually do. So what do you think about essentially, temporary ordination, like if they went to Thailand and stuff like that? and also this is gonna be like almost a three-part question for you, and then
Mhm.
also as a layperson, because we also have the like short-term retreats, whether that's maybe a day, weekend, a week, or even longer, depending on the tradition, and also the temple. So kind of like, what's your thoughts on that? Basically, what should a layperson do?
So, yes, you can completely follow the entire Buddhist path as a layperson. You don't have to become a monk. Uh, what the monk's life does is it creates, easier or better conditions. It facilitates the process, right?
Mhm,
That's what it
mhm.
does,
Right.
really. And also, as a layperson, laypersons have also their part to play, in helping the sangha. So without lay people, monks cannot exist to begin with, right? So
Right.
they play a very important role. They shouldn't see themselves as second to monks, because without them, there can't be monks. So they're essential. They're not a second position. They're essential. Without the lay people, there is no
Mhm.
community at all. It's
Right.
impossible. Especially for within the Theravada tradition, where like we don't cook, we don't buy food, we don't do anything. So like we would just like starve to death,
Right.
if there was no lay people. So yeah, so the Buddha, in the suttas, in the early texts, he praises lay people, for what they do, how they support, how they practice, how they do all these like regular things. The Buddha praises them for taking care of their mom, for taking care of their children,
Right.
right? The Buddha praises them for helping others. So Buddhism is a lot more. Westerners, we think Buddhism is either like philosophizing, or meditating.
Right.
So in order to be Buddhist, you have to, like be a philosopher and you have to be like a meditator.
Mhm.
But that's not true. That's a very, very narrow view of Buddhism.
Right.
Uh, they asked the Buddha, at one time, like, what is it? What does the Buddha teach? And the Buddha said, well, to avoid bad, to do good, and to purify the mind. So to avoid bad is the sila, the precepts, right?
Mhm.
To do good is to practice charity, to do good actions, to share, to be part of your community. And then the last one is to purify the mind. But you can
Mhm.
also purify the mind as a layperson.
Mhm.
There's no obligation to become a monk. So I think, as Western Buddhists, once we start actually engaging with the text and we start interacting with a traditional, like, Asian Buddhist community,
Mhm.
you'll see like how rich the lay life is.
Mhm.
Because as a Western Buddhist, as a layperson, maybe you just go to the temple once a week, once a month, you come back home,
Mhm.
but that's not the experience of a layperson in Asia. Like
Mhm.
they're a layperson 24 hours, like
Mhm.
that experience of being a Buddhist is not like when you go to the temple only. Like they're walking down the streets
Right.
and like the environment is all Buddhist. So it's very different. So once you get that kind of wider layperson perspective, you'll see how rich the lay life is. And I think you really need to
Mhm.
experience that for yourself. If not, you're always going to feel like, well, as a lay person, I'm missing out on Buddhism. And
Mhm.
the only way I can get the whole thing is if I become a monk.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that too. I mean, you also have organizations or groups, which are Buddhist. Maybe Zen is of course very popular inside America, where sometimes I would say you almost get like a stripped down version of Buddhism, which may be a little bit cleaned up compared to if you go to, like as you mentioned, like an Asian temple, Asian Buddhist temple. It's rich. There's lots of ceremonies and practices. People know each other. I still remember when I went for my triple gem ceremony, exchanging phone numbers and everything right there. You're building this community just like right away, and that's what it's about. If I could be closer, it'd be great. But it's one of those things where we are basically in a culture that's not predominantly Buddhist, obviously, but when you're inside that culture, you're right. Back in Asian countries, it's all around you, and even like how you interact with people and what you even say, like as you know. We've talked a lot about Chinese Buddhism, and so they'll go mitofo, to other people, like said,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually saying the Buddha's name, to each
Mm-hmm.
other, but to us that'd be very unusual to say. So it's almost that kind of interaction that we don't have here, and so I kind of mentioned like the retreats, right? So not maybe every temple does it to all the same degree, but I think even the Buddha, had that, back in his time where
Mm-hmm.
you need to give laypersons, kind of like a little taste of this monastic life. And I think and I like you to speak on it, gives you one, a taste of monastic life, like I just said, but it also kind of refreshes your faith and your knowledge and everything else, I mean, you're engaged, if you can, stay at the temple, or, just kind of, stay longer. That's nourishing, if you will, when it comes to the Buddhist religion.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have that like at your temple? Like, because I know like you stayed overnight. Was that sort of like a retreat, or just like, hey, we want you to kind of like, stay a couple of times to get used to the environment?
So it was basically, I was like kind of like an altar boy position,
Okay.
where you come and you stay and you have to wear all white and you practice 8 precepts, and you just kind of like help the monks around, and they kind of tell you kind of like how it's going to be when you become a monk. But what I noticed when I did that is that since I was at the temple all the time, I got to experience the authentic, like, in Asia kind of experience here, because the only people who come here are Asian Buddhists. Like, only on Fridays when we have like the open meditation to the community, you see Westerners come.
Right.
So I would see how they would talk to me, how like they were like interested in the smallest details of my life. They wanted to exchange numbers too. And, they would see my mom. They're like, oh, how's your mom? Is she doing well? How are your brothers and sisters? How are they dealing with all of this? And it was very sincere. And they're like, oh, if you need any help, let me know. So this is very like communal kind of interaction, Buddhism. And there's where I really got to see the fruits of the lay life, right? The selflessness, thinking about others, the compassion, wanting others to be free from their suffering, and how generous they are, giving dana. So then, I actually, even when I first became a monk, even to this day, I was like, wow, if I knew about this, maybe I wouldn't have become a monk if I had grown up in that culture, because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for the Buddhist lifestyle, and I think you only get that if you really engage with traditional, Buddhist communities. And Buddhism is not like something that you do as a hobby or as a club. Right. Or online only. Like when you do that, I can see why you would want to become a monk, because you want to immerse yourself. I get it. Yeah. But you can immerse yourself as a layperson too. It might be a little bit difficult depending where you're at in the world, but try to find that. Try to first get that immersive experience of like how it is to live with other Buddhist people. And that might be enough for you. You might get what you want once you start doing that kind of like like participating deeply in living the Dhamma in every word, in every action, in every gesture that you do.
I absolutely agree with that. It's, if you want to become a monastic, become engaged, with your temple and the religion, and learn about it. And like you did, hey, this is what I'm interested in. So you can have that path, but see what it's all about. It may take, hey, a couple of years. That's okay. Because if you want to become a monastic, what do you want to do for the rest of your life, or just for the day, or for the year, or just to say you're a monastic, right? And so I absolutely agree with that one. And, becoming a monastic, kind of you mentioned a little earlier on, that's the most, what's the right word here? Maybe the best path to actually achieving enlightenment, especially in Theravada, right? So in Mahayana, we have, the Bodhisattva path, and it's, a little bit different views on the path. I mean, it's all the same goal, but just kind of like different paths there. But when I bring that up, I remember there was this Japanese monk, and he's like, do you want to be a one-fisted fighter or a two-fisted fighter? And so like a one-fisted fighter in Buddhism, for the analogy, was a layperson, and two-fisted fighter is a monastic. So if you're, you want to go into this battle against, greed, anger, and delusion, one fist or two fists, to kind of go into it at. And so, yeah, absolutely. Becoming a monastic is, it's, yeah, fantastic what you did, but I think everyone has to take a kind of like a step back and actually be engaged with that particular temple. And I think you have some people, jumping around as well. Maybe they're going from one temple to another temple, maybe discouraged here. And, we're still in the pandemic, it hasn't ended really, but like, last year we put together that guide regarding, kind of living through the pandemic, through the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have a lot of this online, like we're doing right now with Zoom, right? And as you mentioned, that's fine, but actually having that in person, getting engaged with that community is so much more different. And I know that's really hard for a lot of people. They don't have anything around them. It's maybe hundreds of miles or another country until there's actually a temple or something. So this could be it could be books. Have you, because I know you actually do outreach with a lot of Spanish-speaking people around the world, where there's maybe not even a temple nearby. So for them, what would you recommend? So like even just becoming a layperson could be even challenging, but if they want to become a monastic as well, what would those challenges be? What would be your recommendation? So for example, maybe somebody, in Mexico is like, yeah, I want to become a monastic, but where I live, there's nothing nearby. There's no monastics. What would they do? I know that's a loaded question, right?
No, I come across it all the time, almost like every other month. And what I tell them is like, well, you've just read about Buddhism, you've seen it on TV, and stuff like that. And I respect that you want to become a monk and you want to take your practice deeper, but you don't know what it is yet, and you wanting to become a monk, you're overshooting, like you're going too far. You don't even know how it is to be a layperson because you're alone, so like wanting to be a monk is way too much. You don't really know what Buddhism is because you have to live Buddhism, right? So I usually tell them like, let's wait a year, let's talk for a year and I'll teach you what I know and I'll connect you with other Buddhists. Because one of my biggest thing that I do in my online groups through Casa de Bhavana is I try to connect people, So like you're in Mexico, I try to connect you with other Buddhist people in Mexico. And I even send them to other, meditation teachers, lay teachers. I send them to like other schools like Mahayana, Zen, Vajrayana. I'm like, go meet these people, go talk to them, go see how it is, right? So I try to help them, experience the Dhamma and meet other Buddhist people. And then, unfortunately, no one has made it past the year, that I've said, because after that, either one or two things happen. Like one, they begin to understand the richness of the lay life. And they're like, oh, wow, like this is good enough for me. Like this is what I wanted, right? Or another one, they realize the extent to how difficult it is to live as a monk. And they're like, oh, okay, right. I thought it was going to be like watching, those Kung Fu movies. And, right. I thought I was going to live like that. It's not like that. Because as we get to talking, I shared with them, my daily experiences as a monk. And they started being like, but I thought it was going to be like this. I'm like, yeah, this ain't Hollywood. This is real life. This is Buddhism on the ground. Yeah. And it's not going to be like your fantasies about some paradise in some other world. That's not happening. The real life is that, monks have their own idiosyncrasies. You're going to get annoyed. They're going to bother you. They're going to forget things. Lay people are going to come to the temple. Things are going to happen, regular life. Nothing's going to change except like you don't have hair and you wear like robes, but you're going to be the same person, but with 227 rules and in a place that's foreign to you, in a foreign environment. Can you deal with that level of isolation, physical isolation, and to a certain extent in the beginning, social isolation too, because you may not be able to communicate. It's not your culture. So can you do that? And then usually people start backing down, Right. I'm not a good promoter of monasticism.
Well, I think also, I've heard you, like you're able to, do the chanting, do this, speak in, like Sri Lanka or Pali? Are you
Pali? Mostly Pali, yeah.
And so that's something that I think people don't realize either. You have to kind of be able to, if you're going to become a monastic, is usually going to be in one of these particular, traditions, that's culturally specific, so English is great, but can you also maybe speak another language or Pali or Sanskrit or something like that? And I even know kind of like, as far as the, temple and organization, that I follow, they go to quote unquote Buddhist college. You need to go for years. And so like, are you okay going for years to another country and essentially living like a monastic before you're even a monastic, essentially in that way. So it's a commitment. And I know I'm not ready for that commitment. Maybe in a couple of years, we'll see. But for right now, I'm okay as a layperson. I realize what I'm attached to and stuff like that. Maybe some things I don't know, but I know that would be very challenging for me. Even though, the romanticized vision of that looks great, there's a lot more to that. So I think that's really telling too. Like, you deal with people, you help them for about a year. Like, okay, layperson life, I think I'll stay there. And that's okay. It's okay to be a layperson. And like you mentioned, we've had throughout Buddhist history, we wouldn't be here right now without laypersons and monastics. So like even when we look at the, Tipitaka, like all the Buddhist scriptures and canons and stuff like that, usually governments and funded projects by wealthy people. We've had even to this day, all the books that you get quote unquote for free have been paid by somebody, just come out of thin air. The buildings and everything else, So sometimes we have for Westerners like, well, shouldn't this all be free, right? But the monastics have to live, and they have to live somewhere, and they have to have this and that, right? So there's all this foundational support. Because I read it one time somewhere that with laypersons, there's a lot dealing with morality or conduct on that. So they are going to be the wisdom category as far as the Eightfold Path, right? They're going to be learning the sutras and stuff like that. They're going to be doing that, that discipline, that meditative concentration. But it's that daily life. Kind of like you touched on earlier on, is the morality, conduct, following the Buddhist teachings, and just in your everyday life is something that you can do. So you can be, quote unquote, like a mini monk without being ordained in everyday life by following the Buddha's Eightfold Path. You're just taking that extra step where it's the most direct path, that way compared to a layperson, but we still can practice Buddhism. So it's okay to be a layperson.
Yeah, Alan, in the Pali Suttas, there's an occasion where they ask the Buddha about enlightened beings in his Sangha and the community. And he says, there's like thousands of enlightened lay people within the Sangha, and he goes through all the different levels of enlightenment, of awakening all the way down. And then he says, even those who are not enlightened, who are practicing 5 precepts, they're going to be reborn in this heaven because they did so much good. So the Buddha praises the practice of the lay life, how, they can reach so many different attainments, and, how the monk's life wouldn't be possible without them. And he praises their virtuous qualities and all these kind of things. So once we start actually like engaging with the with the actual traditions, you start seeing like, wow, the lay life is really something beautiful, and it's something rich, and it's important, and it's essential. It's not a second position.
And all that support is, generating merits. Like you mentioning, like, it's maybe in this life, I'm never going to be monastic, I'll never reach, enlightenment, but we're saying to stage basically, we're generating these, karmic seeds, if you will, that's continuing on. So that is, I think, the something that, Westerners look at, like, I need to become a monastic because I need to get this done hopefully in the next 5 years. I need to be enlightened, realize nirvana and be done with it, right? We're very, goal success, oriented. So looking at, laypersons, like, is that all they're doing? That's it? They don't want to achieve this? I think we all want to achieve it, but it's a very challenging thing. We had the, original Buddhism, source Buddhism, we had, the Buddha right there. We saw, great success. He was right there teaching everybody. We've had that, as you mentioned, like throughout the, the years and centuries going on, we've had enlightened people, but it's a very challenging thing. We have so much, greed, anger, and this delusion or ignorance kind of going on. It's just very challenging for us. So whatever, maybe what's a good analogy is, as much as we can clean that mirror or that window, or get rid of that dirt, as much as we can do is really helpful, whether you're monastic or a layperson, just engaging. So, I definitely want to thank you for being here today and talking with me and talking to everybody else, sharing your experiences. Do you have anything that you'd like to say to anybody just, brand new to Buddhism? And maybe that was their first thing too. Like, I want to be a monastic, right? I think we kind of mentioned a couple of times too, like it's okay to be a layperson, but what would be like your parting advice, you think?
I would say the most important thing would be to, try to meet traditional, like Buddhist people somehow, even if it's online. Like, instead of connecting to like a Western group, which you might feel a little bit more comfortable with, challenge yourself a little bit, feel uncomfortable, like challenge yourself to put yourself in this awkward position and reach out to like traditional, like Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, Thai, Sri Lankan, Burmese. Reach out to these people online. They love to talk to Westerners anyway. So like, you're going to find a good reception and get to know them and how they live their daily lives, and that way you'll get a better understanding than like book Buddhism or Google Buddhism or, I don't know, like workshop online retreat Buddhism, like those things are not, they're not accurate. They're like taking a very narrow portion of the Dhamma of Buddhism and, calling it that, it's not a fair representation of what it actually is. But when you meet people who, for many generations, their family have been Buddhist, you actually get to see like, wow, this is how you live the Dharma life. And maybe that will be sufficient for you. Maybe that's what you're looking for. Maybe you're really just looking to be part of a Buddhist community and live the Dharma in everyday life. And because you don't see that, you're thinking the only way I can get it is by becoming a monk. You don't have to, that's not the only way. So I'd really suggest that try to connect with traditional Buddhists and, just be their friends, try to become their friends. And I think that will really help you understand what real Buddhism is instead of academic Buddhism, because academic Buddhism is not real Buddhism.
Right.
Just like academic anything is not the reality of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. If you can do it online, that's fine. Because as we mentioned, like you may not even have something around you, but let's say you got a vacation. I always mention this, you got a vacation or something like that. We'll see if you can. Well, obviously we're in a pandemic right now. It's very challenging to be, in person in a lot of these places, but yeah, see if you can actually rearrange your vacation towards maybe a retreat or something. Yeah, that'll be short. Maybe it's just like a glimpse of that experience, but maybe that's going to be something that you just can't get, but could use that to reinforce everything else. And I'd like to hear your opinion on this as well. I talk about it often is, superstition and everything else in Buddhism, where these ceremonies and look very unusual. And at least even what I found in many, many years ago, like, well, that's just cultural, or I don't believe in that, right? And when you start to actually learn I would say the deep meanings behind them, you're like, wow, that's actually a really interesting way to understand and practice Buddhism. Yes, you're going to get these tinges, of cultural aspects to it. Makes perfect sense. But I think you're getting two things from it: understanding of another culture, which is always good, right? Mm-hmm. But also another way to understand Buddhism. And maybe you can have your viewpoint to it as well. But this is a religion, and we have a lot of different things here. The Buddha had a lot of supranormal powers and everything else. And so, which a lot of Westerners are like, whoa, wait a minute. But that's part of it. And so I think when you start shutting yourself down from that, you're missing out when you're engaging with traditional Buddhism, these traditional Buddhist temples. You're missing out because you're trying to now interject your Western and viewpoints of what religion is, of what what is right or what's not right. I think if we went back maybe 200 years, like, how are you talking to a glass thing in front of you, right? To somebody thousands of miles away or hundreds of miles away, right? Or flying around, like this would be all super normal and superstitious to them, right? We'd probably be arrested or something. So it's very unusual. So I think we have to really, keep our expectations in check, but open our hearts and our minds, to like what's going on. It's been around for 2,600 years for a reason, developed and refined, and open yourselves up when you go to, to these temples, and don't be so quick.
Alan, because when you're in your own culture, you don't see the own superstitious or metaphysical things that are happening. So even us as Americans, you go to a game, and what do? You stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah. Well, that's just like a fabric with colors on it. Mm-hmm. What you're doing there is some sort of kind of like devotional practice, right? You're putting your right hand over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag, right? Kind of like I pay homage to the Buddha, Namo Tassa. Yeah. It's, if someone from outside of this culture, like, wow, how weird. Why would everyone stop what they're doing and, worship like this flag that's in the air? But it means something to you, right? You're recognizing the value of what America means. Right. So when you see a Buddha statue, it's like the same thing, the value of the enlightened ones, and then we go to cemeteries and we put flowers. No one's going to get those flowers. Those flowers are just going to, like the person's not there. They're dead. Why do we do it? Right. That's also a metaphysical, superstitious practice that even very secular American people do. But since it's within our own culture, we kind of don't see it that way. Right.
Right.
So, but when we see another culture, it's clear to us, right? Oh, wow, that's a superstitious thing. That's a trivial thing. So we kind of have to recognize that even within our own culture, there's all these kind of things that are, symbolic gestures that we do. And we shouldn't be turned off by them just because they're not ours, Right. Everyone in the world uses symbolism, and we just kind of have to, understand that and be okay with it. So that's just something, you have to get in touch with.
And since you mentioned about the flag, so we were both in the military, different branches, but I remember I was in a movie theater on the base, and before the movie started, the American flag came on. Everybody stood up, and we basically did the Pledge of Allegiance right there. I'm like, what's going on? And you really think about it, you're inside these different cultures, and you just got used to that. as you were inside our culture. So even inside our culture, when you go into these different environments like the military, it's a different experience and you get accustomed to that. So what you and me may be aware of when we were in the military, maybe a different experience than other people have as well too. I think the same goes for Buddhism. So it's keep your mind open, and as you gain more wisdom and understanding, you talk with monastics, you learn things. I think it becomes a much more rich and rewarding experience for a layperson. And if you do want to become a monastic, absolutely possible, right? You've shown it, yeah, absolutely. But I think we're basically telling people, pump the brakes, get involved and understand things. And if you really want to do that, I don't think either one of us say no to that. I mean, that's absolutely wonderful. But make sure you understand what you're getting into. But there's a whole life, that you can actually have as a layperson.
I would say, treat it like if you're going to get married or you're buying a house, right?
Right.
It's a big commitment. Think about, like, you just wouldn't just marry anyone, hopefully, right? Or you just wouldn't just get any house. Like, you'd get to know the person, you get to know the property, you check all the benefits and all the possible, like, things that are not going to be good too. So you have to do thorough research, take your time. Takes people years sometimes to get married. To buy a house might take years too.
Yeah.
So, kind of apply your normal common sense also to Buddhism, right? Don't suspend your common sense just because you want to, take this path all the way. No, use your normal common sense to, evaluate what's happening in Buddhism. And I think that's very important, because sometimes when it comes to religion, we kind of give it a pass and we make exceptions and, like, well, this is different because it's religion. Like, no. You should always do your research. You should always investigate. Take your time. There's a sutta called Upali Sutta, and the Buddha even tells the layperson, I don't think you should convert. I don't think that's a good idea for you. So there's occasions where the Buddha even tells people who are willingly wanting to become Buddhist, hey, slow down, and sometimes he puts them on probation for 6 months before he lets them become Buddhist. So, if this was the advice of the Buddha, you should probably listen to it, take it slow, take your time, and really think about it.
Yeah, and what was that sutta where, I can't remember who it was, but basically it's a very prominent person inside this community or village. It's like, I want to be, become a monk, a bhikkhu. He's like, no, you are so prominent inside your community. I don't want you to become one. He probably didn't say exactly those words, but you're exactly right. It's like, so he didn't really take in everybody, and he was really mindful of those who should come in. There's other ones who's like, why are you waiting? So like, if you're ready to commit, then you're ready to commit. But it's really going to be, and I kind of liked how you put it, like, about marriage. When you speak to the monastic at the temple, you're like, I want to be just like, almost like you did. It's almost like you're getting married. You can talk to the pastor or the priest. They're like, we want to get married. So it's marriage counseling, right? So it's basically counseling. Are you ready? Just like you've been doing for a year with other people. Do you really want to become a monastic? Hear what it's about, and getting prepared for that. And maybe they are ready for marriage to become a monastic, or not. And either way is the right answer. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And if anybody has any questions, for either me or Bhante, please leave it in the comments below. We'd be happy to answer it. So I think we covered a lot of topics, today, but I'm sure there's going to be some other, questions, coming up. And Bhante, he's lived a life. He's went from layperson to monastic, so we can definitely ask him. All right. Thank you very much, Bhante. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.